Hi friends, welcome to Time Python series. In this video, we're going to talk about how to use the Python request module. So using the Python request module, we can do HTTP requests in Python. So how to install the request module? You can install the request module using pip. Let's try to install request module in our Python environment. So I'm going to open a command prompt. So I'm going to write python -m pip install requests. Request module is installed. And there are many use cases for using request module in Python. Since you are able to do HTTP requests in your Python scripts, you can do a lot of web-based automation in your Python scripts. So some of the use cases may be accessing web pages for automating tasks like web scraping or seeing the performance of the website loading or monitoring the website, etc. But the main application generally people use request module is getting data from APIs to build their data pipelines, downloading files using Python scripts from the web to do various automation tasks, and sending post requests to HTTP forms or APIs. So let's see the first example, loading a web page. Let's try to open a new tab and write google.com. You'll see a web page here. And if you view the page source, it's just a HTML which is loaded by using a GET request from the browser. Instead of manually loading a web page, you can actually load web page using the Python request module. So that's what we did in our example. And after you load the web page, you can do a lot of things like seeing how much time the web page has taken to load and reading the contents of the web page to do various automation. There is a separate library called Beautiful Soup using which you can even parse the HTML and do a lot of various automation tasks in Python, or else just checking whether the website is up or not can also be done. So let's try to get started with coding. I'm going to take a blank folder and I'm going to open it with VS Code. Let's create a new file. I'll just name it index.py. Since we have already installed request, we can just import it. I can just write import request. And then in order to do a get request, while we are loading a web page, the browser will do a get request, right? So let's try to do a get request now. So I'm going to write request.get and you have to give the URL. So I'm going to write the URL as a first argument, or else you can write URL equal to, and let's try to write google.com, https google.com, and that's it. Now when you do a get request, you will get the response object in return. So let's set assign it to a variable called response. So let us check whether we have loaded the page successfully or not. So for that, generally what servers do is they send a response code 200. So if the response code is 200, then the page is loaded successfully. So let's try to check that now. So if response dot status code equal to 200, then everything is good. But if I want to stop my script, if it is not 200, I'll just write if response not 200, I'm going to write print page not loaded and quit the script. But if the page is loaded, I just wanted to know how much time it took. So for that, I'm going to write response dot elapsed dot. So elapsed is just a date time dot time delta object. So if you want to know total number of seconds, I can just write elapsed dot total seconds. And let's try to print this data. So I'm going to write print the page took this many seconds. Let's try to format this with a variable. Yeah, so that's it. We just made a get request, got a response object in return, and we're checking if the response status code is 200. That means if the response is okay or not. And if the response is okay, we're just trying to see how much time the page has taken to load. So let's try to run this simple script. And here you can see, since the response code was 200, this code was not hit and we were able to print the elapsed time, and the page took 0.7 seconds. So this is a very simple script where you can monitor the presence of a website. So just by using the get request of the request module, you are able to do some nice automation. Alright, let's try to take this example a little bit further so that we can do further analysis. So in Google, let's try to search Taming Python blog, and using the URL parameters, you can actually do the Google search. Let's try to do this in our request module. So I'm going to take this URL and let's try to load this URL here. So I'm going to write request.get. So if I just run this, this took 0.6 seconds. And now, what if you want to see what are the contents of the HTML page returned? So let's try to debug this code and see whether it's possible or not. So I've got a breakpoint here. So let's try to run in debug mode. Alright, the page is already loaded because the status code is 200. And let's try to examine the response. So I'm going to go to the debug console and I'm going to write the response object res dot text. So if you write response dot text, you can see what the text content of the web page is. So this is the web page content, and this HTML will be loaded in the browser and shown as a web page. You can see even HTML tag script body HTML. So you can parse this HTML and do a lot of automations like seeing what are the links, how many results are fetched, and something like that. But doing it manually is cumbersome, so there is already libraries like Beautiful Soup. So this is how using response object dot text, you can see the text content written by the web page. And if you want to see what are the response headers sent by the web page, you can write response dot headers, and these are all the headers. So I've just written dict of response.headers and you got a dictionary of the response headers. And here you can see what are the headers written in the response by the server. So since using response.text, you can see what is the HTML loaded inside the page. Let's try to see what is the length of the characters just for fun. So I'm going to write print the content is response.text and the length of response.text will give how much characters is in the response. So I'm going to write the content is characters long. So let's try to run this now, and a Google search for taming Python blog will take 0.5 seconds and the content was 50,000 characters long. And there's one more easy option called query parameters. Here in this example, you can see the base URL is google.com/search, and after that you are given a query string as URL parameters. So let's try to give them explicitly outside. So I'm going to create a dictionary called URL params equal to, and there is only one parameter now, which is q equal to taming Python blog. I'm just going to copy this, and it's like a dictionary. So you have to write a dictionary here. So this was our URL parameter. So let's try to strip out this from here and write URL params equal to the URL params dictionary which we have just created. So the resultant URL which is going to be sent to the server is google.com/search question mark q equal to this string. So you can give multiple URL parameters in this dictionary and pass it to the URL so that it's easy for you to construct URLs using URL parameters. In fact, let's try to run this and debug our code now to see what URL is sent to the server. Alright, the parameters was params. So you have to give params, and in that you have to give the URL parameters dictionary. So let's try to run this. Alright, our page is loaded and let's try to see what the URL the page has resolved to. So debug console, I can just write response.url, and here you can see the URL is resolved to google.com/search question mark q equal to the string which we are given. Alright, let's see the next use case of downloading a file. For that, I'm going to go into a site called http://bin.org, and this is an amazing website where you can actually test your APIs because he gives methods where you can call them and get results and you can test your Python code. That's what we're going to do in this video now. So there is a nice URL for downloading images. So if I just run this and test this URL, I'm just going to click try it out and click execute. So you have to make request to http://bin.org/image, and you have to give a request header name accept, and the attribute value should be image/webp, and in response you're going to get an image. So let's try to load this in the new tab and see. Here you can see I've got an image. So let's try to download this image from Python. So in our code, I'm going to take the URL https http://bin.org/image, and I don't need query parameters, so I'm going to remove this now, and let's remove this line also. But I'm going to give some headers because you have to give some request headers where the header accept should be given as image/webp. So it's really easy to give headers. Just give another input called headers equal to, and this should be a dictionary where you can give key value pairs. So the key is accept and the value is image/webp. So this way, using the headers input, you can actually give the request headers to the request object while doing the get request or any request. So if the response code is not 200, that means the server did not send the image. So I'm just writing image not loaded. But if the image is sent, you can get the image as bytes. You can just write response.content. So response.content takes the response from the server and gives it as bytes. So if I want to write it to a file, I can just write open the file path. So for this, let's try to save it in a test.png image in the same folder and dot write the response.content. But since we are writing bytes, you have to open it in write byte mode. So I am writing wb. So you're opening the image file in write bytes mode and writing the bytes which are received from the server. So if this runs successfully, you have to get a test.png image here. So let's try to run this. And here you got the test.png downloaded from the server using Python. So this way you can do a lot of automation. Like if you want to download daily reports or if you want to do some kind of periodic downloading, this can be an image file or a CSV file or whatever file. Just call the response.content and write it to a file. So remember, if you want to give additional request headers, you can add this additional input called headers equal to and give it a dictionary in the request.get or post or whatever method. Alright, let's see the next use case, which is performing post requests using request module. When you click a form in a website, you're actually doing a post request, and a request will be sent along a payload, which is a JSON payload generally. So this is why people use post requests. You can send request along with a payload. So in order to demonstrate how to do post requests using the request module, let's go to this http-bin.org site, and here you got http methods post, and let's try to try it out, execute. So you just get to give a http post request and then write a request header called accept application JSON, and in response you'll get this JSON from the post request, and the URL is http-bin.org/post. So here in this web UI you did not give any post request body, but in your Python script you can give post request body in the form of JSON. You just have to write request.post, and the URL is going to be this one, http-bin.org/post. So this can be any URL you want to do the post request, and the headers is accept application JSON. So this way you can set the request headers while sending post request to the server. And then the next important thing is you have to send some data with the post request. So let's try to create a post request body, a variable called post body, and let's try to give some data. So this is our post request body. So let's try to send it along with the post request here. So I'm going to write a new parameter called data equal to the post request body. So now I'm doing a post request to this URL along with this request headers, and this is the post body, and I know in response I will get a JSON. So let's try to see what text is returned. So I'm going to write print response.text. So let's try to run this now, and you can see the response.text is a JSON which is returned from the server after doing the post request. But this is just text. Request module also gives a very easy interface to convert this text into JSON. So it's really simple, just call response.json. So this will create a new Python dictionary which converts this text into JSON and assigns it to a Python dictionary. So let's try to get the response object, and it will be response.json. Call this JSON method on the response. So let's try to print the response object now, and here you got the response JSON. So if I want to extract this parameter origin, since it's a Python dictionary, I can just write response object of origin. Let's try to run this now, and you got the origin IP address. So this way, using post request, you can get response and parse them and use them in your automations. And let's try to go to the next use case where you need to authenticate your requests. Most of the websites use captchas or protect their APIs using authorization, because if they don't do so, people will be attacking their websites by doing a lot of automated attacks. So if you have APIs exposed, generally people use some kind of authentication. So in this example, we are using the case of basic authorization. So doing that is very simple. Just use auth equal to the username password as a tuple. Then request module will set the basic authorization header in the request header. So to demonstrate that, in this http-bin.org, there is an endpoint inside this auth section, basic authorization. So let's try to use the username as XYZ and password as ABCD. So this is just example. And then the page is asking the basic authorization username password, and then you got the response. So in order to test this, let's try to go to this URL, and here we are doing a HTTP GET request. So you're going to write request.get. So there is no payload, there is no data, and we are giving a header accept application JSON in the request. So request headers would be accept application JSON, and in the response body, if you are given correct username password, you should get authenticated equal to true. So let's try to get the JSON and see whether we are getting expected response or not. I'll get an error because I did not do basic authentication. So for that, you just have to add another parameter called auth equal to the username password as a tuple. So in this example, the username was XYZ and the password was ABCD. So let's try to run this now, and here you got the response, and the response is authenticated equal to true, and the user was XYZ. So since it is JSON, you can actually parse this and see whether your page is authenticated or not. So this way, using the auth parameter, you can actually add basic authentication to your requests. Alright, let's go to next important and interesting use case, which is fetching data from JSON API. So for this, let's try to take the public API of GitHub. So if this is a public API of GitHub, instead of GitHub username, let's write a real GitHub username. So let's try to see the repositories of .NET. Now you can see a huge JSON. Let's try to see the raw data. There's a huge JSON here, and it's basically a list of JSON objects, and each JSON object contains the data about a individual repository owned by the user. So here the user called .NET in GitHub has 29 repositories, and you can even see how many stars each repository has. So here stargazers count is 3. So suppose if I give an automation task using the GitHub API, find what is the most starred repository of the username called .NET. So instead of searching it manually, you can actually use the request module to actually load the JSON into Python and do the searching for you. Alright, let's do this. you're going to call request.get, and this is going to be the URL. I've given a substitution parameter called GitHub username. If you want to find the information about .NET GitHub repository, I'm going to write GitHub username equal to .NET. And no need of headers, no need of basic authentication. And now you can take the response object and convert it to a JSON. And let's try to see how much time the response has taken using response.elapsed.total seconds. Let's try to format it. Let's try to find the most starred GitHub repository of the username called .NET. So in the response, you can see each object has an attribute called stargazers count. So based upon this stargazers count, you can say which repository has the maximum number of stars. So for that, I'm going to write max of response object, but this is just an array. You have to say based upon which attribute you have to see the max value. So I'm going to write key equal to a lambda function which takes in the object and returns x of stargazers count. And now I'm going to get the object which has a maximum value of stargazers count. So it's going to give me a repo object in return. So let's name it max stars repo object. So the name of the repo can be obtained from the object using this name attribute. So let's try to write the name of the repo which has maximum stars. So I can write print the repo with max stars for the GitHub username is this max stars repo object, and get the attribute called name with number of stars can also be written. Max stars repo object of the stargazers count. You have to format this string to substitute the variables. So the repo with max stars for this GitHub username is this with this many stars. Oh, at the end, let's try to write stars also. So let's try to run this script. Okay, we did not call the function, we just kept the function, so the output is not good. So let's try to call the function total seconds here, and let's try to run this again. And here in the response, you got the page took 0.6 seconds. The repo with max stars for .NET is ASP.NET Core with 31,000 stars. So now you can see the power of the request module to actually get the data from a web API and gain insights into the data to power your own automation. So this program was run for the user .NET. So let's try to run this program for another user called Microsoft. So let's try to run this now. And now you can see the repo with max stars for Microsoft username is academic content with 2525 stars. So this way, by parsing the JSON data from APIs using the request module, you can gain many valuable insights and power your own data pipelines and automation. So that's it, guys. This is about the request module in Python and the use cases. We have covered the use cases of loading a web page, accessing APIs for JSON like content, downloading files like images or CSV, and sending post requests to the server. You can see I've created a blog post on using the request module in Python along with examples so that you can copy paste and practice it in your own computer. And I've also given you the link to the official documentation of the request module, and I highly recommend you check out the documentation because it has a lot of examples and the explanation is really nice. And there is also reference to a lot of advanced topics where you can do more with request module. In our example, we have just covered basic authentication. You can even do these other types of authentication also using the request module, so you can check out the official documentation. Please post your valuable comments or ask questions using the comment section. That's it, guys. Hope you like this video. Thank you for watching. Peace.